My name is Kayla Peterson. I'm 34 years old, a screenwriter living in Santa Monica on the west side of California, a city where the sun shines like it's trying to convince you nothing bad ever happens here. My apartment sits high up, 18th floor, ocean view, the kind of view people post online with captions like, blessed. Every morning, I make coffee, check my email, and sit at a long wooden desk in my office. I write for studios during the day. And at night, I write for myself because the stories I sell are never the ones that keep me awake. People think success fills you, but sometimes it just gives your emptiness better lighting. I was once a child lost in a shopping mall. No one remembered my name. No one knew where I came from. I grew up in shared housing with bunk beds, long hallways, and meal schedules posted by the day. No one sang me happy birthday. No one kept the drawings I made. I learned not to ask questions. I got used to not being chosen. And then one night, years later, I sat down and wrote my whole life out. I called the script Kayla, Mama's Little Superhero, a film no one asked for, not trendy, no clear audience. But I wrote it anyway, like tossing a message in a bottle into the ocean, hoping someone, somewhere, would read the one line I knew was still true. Mom, if you ever called me Kayla, I'm still here. I never imagined she'd find it. And then she came, just when I was about to stop believing in anything. She brought a faded canvas bag. Inside was a little action figure with one arm missing, and a family photo taken when I was 3.5. The way she showed up, poor, thin, quiet, made me realize something I'd written into 100 scripts but never understood until it happened to me. There are things in life no story can control, no matter how good you are at writing endings. And it all started on an afternoon 28 years ago. I don't remember what day of the week it was. I just remember I was excited because my mom was taking me to the mall. My dad was no longer around. He'd died a year earlier in a work accident, and after that, my mother moved like someone trying not to break in half. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't scream. She just got quieter. Tired in a way kids can sense but can't name. So when she said, "Let's go to the mall," it felt like a miracle. The mall that day was crowded, but not chaotic. Kids running. Adults packed into checkout lines, music playing overhead like happiness was something you could buy if you picked the right store. My mom walked me through the aisles, stopping the longest in the toy section, and that's where she picked it up. A red superhero figure with silver eyes, the exact one I'd begged for after watching superheroes on TV. I'd asked for it so many times I thought she hated the sound of my voice. But that day, she smiled softly, like she was trying to give me something brighter than grief. "This is an early birthday gift," she said, brushing my hair back, "for Mommy's little superhero." When I held that toy in my hands, I felt invincible. Not because it was plastic, but because it meant she saw me. I hugged it tight to my chest like it had a heartbeat. After that, she sat me down on a bench near the escalator, right where the mall lights reflected off the polished floor. "I'll be right back," she said. "I just need to exchange a receipt." Like any 6-year-old who still believed their mom always came back, I nodded without question. I watched her walk away, her coat swaying slightly with her steps. Then I started playing with the superhero's arms, twisting them, making him fight invisible villains, whispering sound effects under my breath. Minutes passed. Not long, not enough for fear. And then I saw her, or I thought I did. A woman walked by, wearing a grayish-blue coat, shoulder-length hair, slender build, white shoes, carrying a shopping bag exactly like my mom's. I couldn't see her face clearly, but my heart called out before my mind could catch up. That was her. I jumped up. "Meh," I started to say, but my voice was too small. The crowd swallowed it whole. She didn't turn. She kept walking toward the terminal inside the mall connected to the metro line. And without thinking, I ran after her, clutching my red superhero so tight it hurt my fingers. My little legs hit the shiny tiled floor. I weaved through grown-ups like I was threading a needle in a storm. I made it onto the last train car just before the doors shut. I still remember the sound. That sharp final thunk of the doors closing, like the world deciding for me. The train screeched, then began to move, and I froze in the middle of the car, scanning faces, searching for a grayish-blue coat, searching for the one person my whole life depended on. But I didn't see her, just strangers swaying with the rhythm of the train. Faces I didn't recognize, not a single familiar one among them. Panic started creeping in, slow at first, like cold water seeping through socks. I moved down the rows of seats, ducking between knees and shopping bags. "Mom?" I called quietly. No one answered. I tried again, louder. "Mom!" Some people glanced down at me. One man frowned like I was in his way. A woman looked away, like she didn't want to become involved. No one reached out a hand. No one asked, "Are you okay?" Eventually, I curled into a small corner between two seats where the light didn't shine directly, where I figured no one would notice me. It felt like the safest spot I could find, and I was right. Because when you're small and scared, being unnoticed feels like protection until it becomes your whole life. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time on a train doesn't feel real. It's just motion and noise and the terrifying sense that you're being taken somewhere you didn't choose. After a while, I heard a ticket inspector coming through, tearing stubs. When I saw the uniform, my stomach dropped. I thought they'd throw me off the train. I thought if I got kicked out, my mom would never find me. So I pushed myself deeper into that corner, pressing my forehead to my knees. My breathing turned fast and shallow. My chest burned. My whole body shook like it wanted to escape my skin. At one point, I tried to picture my mom's face. But even then, the memory was already starting to blur. Everything turned into a soft yellow haze. All I could hear was the grinding of the wheels and the heavy engine pulling me farther and farther away from everything I knew. So I held onto my superhero toy like it was the only thing still tying me to my world. The train passed through stations like nameless rooms. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. All I remembered was getting on the train because I thought I saw my mom. And then the world kept moving without asking permission. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, the train had stopped at a large station. The doors were open. People were filing out. I followed them, because children follow crowds when they don't know what else to follow. I stepped onto the platform. I didn't cry out loud. I didn't stop walking. And then I saw her again. The exact figure from behind. Grayish-blue coat, white shoes, the same shape of shoulders. My heart jumped like it had been waiting for a second chance. Without thinking, I ran. My voice cracked. "Mom, wait!" I pushed past people entering the station, ran down a stairway to the street, ran until my lungs screamed. And then I couldn't see her anymore. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, breathless, chest heaving, throat tight. People began to stare. A little girl clearly lost with no one around. Pale face, tears rolling silently down my cheeks. Still clutching a red superhero my mother had bought me. That's when a kind older woman approached. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "are you lost?" I nodded, pressing my lips tight, like if I opened my mouth, everything inside me would spill out. She comforted me and had her husband go to the nearby police station. A little while later, an officer came and took me in. After they calmed me down, a young officer sat next to me. They asked my name. I whispered, "Kayla." They asked my mom's name. I hesitated. Then mumbled, "Sarah," or Sandra, I'm not sure. They asked where I got on the train. I looked down at my feet and shook my head. I didn't know the name of the station. I didn't remember the name of the mall. I didn't even know what city I was in. All I knew was I got on the train because I thought I saw my mom, and now I had no idea how to get back. The young officer leaned down, gently rested a hand on my shoulder, and said, "It's okay, Kayla. We're going to find your mom." I didn't answer. I stared into the space in front of me, still holding my superhero. And in my head, I could only think one thing. If Mom sees me somewhere, she'll recognize me, right? That night, they let me stay at the police station. Not in a cell, just a small room with a plastic chair that squeaked when I moved, and fluorescent lights that never fully turned off. The air smelled like old coffee and paper. Every few minutes, a phone rang somewhere down the hall, and every time it did, my body jolted like it might be my mother calling for me. But the phone never rang for me. An officer offered me a blanket, thin, scratchy, the kind that doesn't really warm you. It just reminds you that you're cold. I wrapped it around my shoulders anyway and pressed my superhero against my chest like it could block out the reality creeping in. They asked me questions again. "What's your mom's name?" I said it softer this time, as if whispering would make it more accurate. "Sarah. Maybe Sandra." "Do you know her phone number?" I gave them the only number I could remember, the one my mother had repeated to me like a rhyme when she taught me what to do if I ever got lost. But when they called, it didn't connect. Or no one answered. Or maybe my mother was somewhere else, screaming my name into a crowd that couldn't hear her. I didn't know. All I knew was I kept expecting to see her burst through the station doors, hair messy, eyes wild, face flooded with relief the moment she saw me. Because that's what moms do. That's what I believed, even with my whole life trembling. But morning came, and she still didn't. The next day, they took me back to the station where the train had stopped. They walked me through platforms, asked if I recognized anything. Signs, smells, a snack stand, a billboard. It all looked like the same blur of movement, a grown-up world built too big for a child's memory. They reviewed missing child reports. They called nearby shopping centers. They checked train routes in the opposite direction. They asked security at different stations if anyone had seen a woman panicking, calling for her daughter, searching. Nothing. No matching report. No frantic mother tearing the system apart. Just silence. Professional, procedural silence. And by late afternoon, the word temporary started floating around in conversations like a shadow. Child services will need to get involved. They said it like it was a neutral thing, like a handoff, like a package being signed over to the next department. When the social worker arrived the next morning, she knelt in front of me so our eyes were level. She had kind eyes, the kind that try to soften the truth even when the truth is sharp. "Kayla," she said gently, "we're going to take you somewhere safe while we keep looking for your mom." I looked down at my superhero. My fingers had rubbed the paint on its silver eyes until they were dull. The social worker noticed. "Do you want to bring that with you?" I nodded immediately. Not because it was a toy, because it was proof. That someone had loved me that day. That I hadn't imagined my mother's smile in the toy section. Because without it, I felt like I'd have nothing left that belonged to me. The drive to the children's center felt endless. The world outside the window changed colors and shapes, but none of it meant anything. I didn't understand distances. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I wasn't going back to the mall. I wasn't going back to my mother's hand. We arrived at an old gray building tucked behind industrial warehouses, like the place was designed to be forgotten. Inside, everything echoed. Footsteps, doors, the faint buzz of overhead lights. The sleeping quarters were split into sections. Green-painted bunk beds lined up like someone had tried to organize childhood into rows. They handed me a scratchy blanket and a pair of plastic sandals. A staff member pointed to a bottom bunk like it was an assignment. "That one's yours," she said. She didn't ask if I was scared. She didn't ask if I wanted a nightlight. Because kids like me weren't supposed to need anything. We were supposed to adjust. Those first few days, I cried so much my throat burned. Every morning, I woke up in that cold room under that rough blanket, and for one stupid second, I thought I'd dreamed it all. I thought I'd open my eyes and see my mother standing in the doorway, smiling like she always did, saying, "You overslept." But no one came. No door opened. No familiar footsteps. Just schedules, meals, a bell, and children who had already learned how to be quiet in a place like that. I refused to eat. I didn't play with the other kids. I buried my face in the pillow and cried until my chest ached and my tears turned into dry, hollow sobs. At night, I'd sneak over to the window and stare out at the yard. Not because I could really see anything, just shadows and dim lights. But because part of me believed my mother would come walking up, calling my name, like the world still made sense. One night, I jolted awake in the dark. I was sure I'd heard her voice in the hallway. I ran out barefoot, heart pounding, and found another girl curled up in the corner, crying quietly into her own blanket. It wasn't my mother. It was just another lost child. And somehow that realization hurt in a way I couldn't explain. I don't know how long it took me to stop crying. Maybe weeks, maybe longer. But eventually I grew used to the place. I started eating on schedule, sleeping on schedule. I still curled into the same corner of my bed, still clutched the superhero every night. But I didn't cry anymore. Not because I was stronger, because there were no tears left. In my heart, I never forgot my mother. I held on to one thought like blind faith. She will find me. Every abandoned child has that thought. Because without it, you don't survive. I just never imagined it would take nearly 20 years. When I turned 7, everything began to change. A family came to meet me. They were a couple living in a suburb nearly 100 miles from the center. They had warm smiles and clean clothes, and a car that smelled like vanilla air freshener. Their house had a white picket fence, a backyard grill, and a golden retriever that waited on the porch like it had never known hunger. During my first few days there, they called me a gift from God. At 7, I didn't fully understand what that meant. But I heard the warmth in their voices, and something inside me, something dangerous, started to hope again. Maybe this was it. Maybe I was finally going to be chosen. And for the next 2 years, they truly did love me. Or at least, that's what I believed. Every night before bed, my adoptive mother sat beside me, read me a story, fixed my blanket, and whispered that I was special. My adoptive father built me a little bookshelf from pine wood, carving my name into the bottom edge like it mattered. They took me to church every Sunday, bought me a child-sized dress for special occasions, took dozens of family photos. In our first Christmas picture by the tree, I stood between them, her hand on my shoulder, his arm wrapped around us. I smiled as wide as I could, because I wanted that picture to be true forever. I stopped waiting by the window at night. I packed my red superhero into a box, carefully wrapped it, and pushed it under the bed like an old toy I didn't need anymore. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space in someone else's life. And then one day, my adoptive mother told me she was pregnant. When she found out, she burst into tears. My adoptive father called every relative he knew. The name Kayla, which I used to hear daily, started getting replaced by different words. The baby, our miracle, she's coming. At first, I told myself it wouldn't change anything. I'd seen families on TV with multiple kids. They all looked happy. So I tried to be extra helpful, extra quiet, extra good. I cleaned up without being asked. I folded towels. I offered to get my adoptive mom water when she said she was tired. And she smiled at me the way you smile at someone being polite, not the way you smile at someone you need. After the baby was born, I was moved into a smaller room near the stairs. The bed my adoptive father had once painted for me was taken apart and replaced with a white crib in the middle of their bedroom. The Mother's Day drawing I made, big hearts, messy crayons, the words I love you, was taken down and replaced with a framed pink handprint from the baby, proudly hung in the center of the wall. Through it all, I tried to adjust. I tried not to be jealous, because jealousy felt like something only ungrateful kids had. But one night, I dreamed I was falling into water. I was calling for help, and no one heard me. I woke up soaked in sweat, heart hammering, and I knew something was coming. It felt like a warning. A few months later, I was called into the living room on a light, rainy afternoon. The room smelled like wet grass from the backyard. My adoptive mother sat on the couch, eyes red, hands clenched so tightly on her lap, her knuckles looked pale. My adoptive father stood near the window, arms crossed, gaze avoiding mine. The silence was so thick I could hear the wall clock ticking. For the first time, I noticed it made a sound. After a long pause, my adoptive father finally spoke. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was cold. Final. We'll take you back to the center in the next few days. For a second, I didn't understand the words, because my brain didn't have a place to put them. Then it hit me, like a door slamming inside my chest. I broke down. Not the quiet kind of crying. Not hiding my face in my sleeve. I sobbed like something had been ripped out of me. Everything I had tried to hold together for 2 years, trust, hope, bedtime smiles, shattered in that one sentence. I choked on my tears and asked the only question that mattered to a child. What did I do wrong? No one answered. My adoptive mom looked down, lips trembling, hands still on her knees, like she might stand up and hug me. But she didn't. My adoptive dad kept his eyes on the rain outside. The silence felt like punishment. The decision was approved because I had never been officially adopted. I was still a child in temporary care. A trial. A test they kept when it worked and returned when it didn't. 2 days later, the social worker came to pick me up. The night before, I packed my clothes carefully, folded every shirt, every sock, old sneakers. Then I pulled the red superhero out from under the bed. I tucked it between 2 sweaters like it was fragile. Like it could break. Like I could break. When I followed the social worker to the car, my adoptive mother stood on the porch. She gave me a quick, hurried hug, like someone embracing a friend before a late train. She cried. But in my heart, I still didn't understand what they were crying for. My adoptive father stood at the door, hands in his pockets. He said, "Good luck, Kayla," like I was leaving for college. Like I was a visitor. To them, I was just someone who had passed through their lives for a few years. No place. No meaning. I got into the car. The door closed. And as we pulled away, I looked back through the window at the little house, the trimmed lawn, the white fence. Everything looked the same, only now I knew I'd never go back. On the drive to the center, I didn't say a word. My therapist years later would tell me that when I'm scared, I should picture the safest place in my mind. But at 9 years old, my mind was blank. There was no safe place left. There was only one question, repeating over and over. What did I do wrong? It took me many years to understand the answer. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wasn't their biological child. And sometimes, that alone is enough to stop being loved. I returned to the center like a package sent to the wrong address. No one asked why I'd been sent back. No one blamed the family. No one said, that must have hurt. They just handed me a new blanket, set an old suitcase by the bottom bunk, and moved on to the next task on their clipboard. I was almost 9 years old, and I had just learned my first real lesson about the world. Love is a contract. When the terms change, it expires. After that, something inside me shifted. I stopped drawing pictures of my mom. I stopped waiting for footsteps outside windows. I no longer hid the red superhero under my pillow. Instead, I hid something else. A small white notebook with blank pages. At first, I didn't even know why I picked it up. I just needed somewhere to put the noise in my head. So I started writing. Sometimes it was a made-up conversation between a little girl and a faceless mother. Sometimes it was just my name, Kayla Peterson, over and over. Like if I wrote it enough times, someone would see it. Back then, I didn't know it was called writing. I only knew that when I filled those pages, I didn't feel as cold inside. On paper, I could say everything I wasn't allowed to say out loud. I could be angry. I could ask, "Why did you leave me?" I could imagine my mother answering. In that notebook, I wasn't temporary. I wasn't a trial. I existed because I said I did. After I was returned, more families came. They stood behind glass windows and looked at us like we were options, like we were potential futures they could test. "He seems quiet," they'd say about another child. "She looks well behaved." When they looked at me, I knew exactly what they saw. Not a child. A risk. A girl who had already been returned once. And this time I didn't wait for them to decide. When staff asked if I wanted to try living with a family for a few days, I shook my head. When they insisted, at least give them a chance, I stayed silent. It wasn't hatred. It was self-preservation. Because being unwanted twice felt survivable. 3 times? I wasn't sure. So I chose invisibility. I didn't make close friends. I didn't join sports. I chose the farthest corner in classrooms. I became very good at watching. I learned how adults' voices changed when they were lying. I memorized the way a smile tightened when someone was pretending. I studied how long a hug lasted when it was real versus when it was polite. I observed everything, and at night I wrote it down. I didn't have a family, but I had words. And slowly, through those small, unnoticed stories, I found something most kids like me never get. A voice, a presence, a way to exist without asking permission. By the time I was 15, writing wasn't just an escape. It was oxygen. I wasn't trying to become a writer. I was trying not to disappear. I rarely spoke at school. I barely looked at anyone. I chose the seat closest to the wall in the library, where I could see everyone without being seen. And one afternoon, my English teacher, Mrs. Adler, found a stack of pages I'd hidden inside my desk. It was a 10-page monologue. A girl writing to her mother. Not angry. Not accusing. Just waiting. I thought I was in trouble. I thought she'd scold me for writing during class. Instead, she called me over. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder and said something that would change my life. "Kayla, you write like you've lived too long in a world no one can see." I looked at her, unsure whether that was an insult. She smiled. "Keep writing," she said softly. "Write so your heart doesn't go cold." That night, I pulled out every scrap of paper I had ever written on. I stayed up past curfew with a flashlight under my blanket, rewriting scenes, sharpening dialogue, building worlds. Not to impress anyone, not to be chosen, but because when I wrote, I felt less alone. Around that time, my name started to mean something to me again. No one had given me that name except my birth mother. Every time I signed Kayla Peterson at the top of a page, I felt like I was reclaiming something. Like even if she never found me, I was still here. After graduation, I didn't go to college right away. Money wasn't something kids like me had in abundance. I took whatever jobs I could find. I brewed coffee for aging screenwriters who complained about studios ruining art. I transcribed dialogue for B-list TV shows. I did script coverage for small-time producers who never remembered my face. During the day, I worked. At night, I wrote. Sometimes in public bathrooms. Sometimes on the back of receipts. For 3 years, not a single word I wrote sold. I collected rejection emails the way other people collect trophies. Not the right fit. We're looking for something different. Thank you for submitting. I stopped flinching when I read them. Rejection felt familiar. Predictable. At least it didn't surprise me. And in the middle of all that, with the little money I managed to save, I started searching for my mother. I began with official records, requested access to old foster care files, went to birth registry offices, hired a private investigator with my first real savings. When nothing came back, I started going myself. For nearly 2 years, I spent almost everything I earned flying to cities tied to faint memories. Places with big train stations. Places where someone once mentioned a woman who lost her child. Places where the names Sarah or Sandra appeared in records without a full story attached. I stood outside old malls for hours, watching every woman walk by. My heart would start racing when I saw grayish-blue coats. I'd think, if I yell, "Mom," would she turn around? But I never yelled, and no one ever turned. Some nights, standing in the middle of crowds, I'd feel that old panic rising again, like I was 6 years old, like I was still on that train. And I'd wonder, am I searching for her, or am I just searching for proof that I wasn't abandoned? There were moments I almost stopped. Moments I told myself maybe she stopped looking too. And then one night in September, with almost nothing left to believe in, I sat down at my desk and started writing my life story. From the day I got lost, to every home I passed through, to every time I was returned like an item with a receipt attached. I called it Kayla, Mama's Little Superhero. I didn't know why I was writing it. It felt like lighting one last match in the dark. At the very end of the script, I wrote one line. Just one. Quiet. Unpolished. Not dramatic. "Mom, if you ever called me Kayla, ma'am, I'm still here waiting for you." I never imagined that line would change everything. It took me nearly a year to finish the script. No producer was waiting. No contract was promised. I wrote it in silence, one page at a time, during late nights in a tiny rented room lit only by a desk lamp and the low hum of a ceiling vent. Sometimes it felt like I was writing to the void. No address. No reply expected. But I kept writing because if I didn't, I was afraid I'd vanish into the same silence that swallowed my childhood. 3 months after finishing the final draft, I printed it out, slid it into an envelope, sent it to 4 indie film companies where I had once done odd jobs. For 2 weeks, no one responded. Then, in the 3rd week, I got a single email. It said, "We need to talk." I read it 3 times before I believed it. Months later, the film was greenlit on a shoestring budget. We shot it in 19 days in a small town near Fresno. No famous actors, no big-name director, just a group of people who understood what it meant to grow up without certainty. The final scene, where the girl stands in the rain, holding the red superhero, was filmed on my birthday. I didn't tell anyone. It felt too personal. None of us thought the film would go far, but it did. It went farther than any of us expected. People didn't need special effects. They didn't need explosions. They needed the quiet ache of something unfinished. After the premiere, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Studio reps called. Journalists called. Talk show invitations piled up. I was suddenly someone people wanted to listen to. I rented a penthouse in Santa Monica. Ocean view. Long wooden desk. Black leather chair. Bank account that no longer panicked over 3 digits. I had everything I once thought meant security. But at night, walking past yellow-lit cafes, watching couples hold hands like belonging was effortless. I still felt like the girl sitting on a plastic chair near an escalator, waiting, because success can amplify emptiness. It doesn't erase it. And then, the women started showing up. Every week, 1 or 2, each claiming to be my mother. Some brought faded photos. Some cried before they even sat down. Some spoke about sacrifice. Some spoke about royalties. I listened quietly, nodded politely, and crossed their names off an invisible list inside my heart. Because there was one detail none of them knew. One detail I had never shared publicly. When I was 3 years old, I had emergency abdominal surgery. Intussusception. I have a small scar on my lower abdomen. Thin. White. Almost invisible. But it's there. That memory was never in the script. Never in interviews. Only my birth mother, the one who held my hand through that surgery, would know. I kept that scar like a final lock on a door no one could fake. 8 months after the film premiered, the media buzz faded. Invites slowed. Life became quieter again. I returned to my routine. Coffee. Ocean view. Writing. I wasn't writing to be found anymore. I was writing to hold on to myself. And then, one October morning, my manager called. His voice sounded different. Hesitant. "There's a woman here," he said. "No appointment." She didn't explain much. I felt that old chill creeping up my spine. "She didn't bring anything," he continued, "except an old superhero toy." My fingers went numb around the phone. "What did she say?" I asked. She said, "If Kayla still remembers the superhero with silver eyes, she believes she's her mother." The room went so still I could hear the wind slipping through the window crack. My mind flooded with reasons to say no. Another imposter. Another story. Another performance. I was ready to tell him to turn her away. But something in me, something 6 years old and terrified, whispered, "What if this is the last chance?" So I said, "I'm coming in." I arrived at the office around 4 in the afternoon. The receptionist didn't need to explain. She just tilted her head toward the waiting area. And that's when I saw her. A thin woman with slumped shoulders, gray streaking through her loose hair, face bare, hands folded carefully in her lap. Beside her, an old canvas bag. And sticking out of it, a red superhero toy. Paint chipped, one arm broken, silver eyes dulled with time. I stopped breathing. Because suddenly, I remembered something. Months earlier, I had seen a woman standing across the street near the bus stop outside our building. Gray coat, canvas bag. She never came inside. She just stood there, watching, then quietly walked away. Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. Now I understood. She had found me before, but she didn't feel worthy enough to step forward. And as I stood there watching her in the waiting area, I felt my heart begin to race. Not like a grown woman, like a 6-year-old girl who thought she saw her mother in a crowd. She looked up, our eyes met, and something inside me broke open. For a second, neither of us moved. The hallway light flickered slightly behind me. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Loud, uneven, almost angry. She stood slowly. Not dramatic, not rushed. Just careful. Like she was afraid one wrong movement would make me disappear. Her coat was thinner than it should have been for October. The cuffs were frayed. Her shoes were clean but worn at the edges. There was a faint smell of laundry soap, the cheap kind. and something older. Tired fabric. Long travel. Her lips trembled before any sound came out. Are you Kayla? Her voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used for big words in a long time. I didn't answer. Not yet. I stepped closer instead. Every instinct inside me was screaming two different commands. Run. Stay. I could feel my manager watching from behind the glass office door. I could feel the receptionist pretending not to stare. Witnesses. Always witnesses when your life turns into something public. She swallowed and tried again. I don't know if you remember me, she said softly, but I never forgot you. The words hit me in the chest. I'd heard that line before, from women who rehearsed it in front of mirrors. So I forced myself to stay calm, measured. I stepped closer until we were only a few feet apart. When I was 3, I said quietly, I had a bad stomachache. Her eyes widened, not in confusion, but in recognition. I continued, my voice steady. What happened? She didn't hesitate, not even for a second. You cried all night, she whispered. You wouldn't let go of my hand. I carried you to the emergency room. You were terrified of needles. Her voice cracked. The doctor said it was intussusception. They rushed you into surgery. I waited outside for hours. When you woke up, you were groggy and angry. You kept asking if the superhero toy could come in. My breath caught. She stepped forward half a step, then stopped herself. I leaned over your bed, she said, barely holding herself together, and I put my hand on your belly. I told you, Kayla, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. The room tilted. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until I lifted my shirt slightly, just enough to reveal the thin white scar on my lower abdomen. She saw it, and whatever composure she had left shattered. She covered her mouth with both hands. A sound came out of her, not a cry, not a scream, something deeper. Something dragged up from 20 years underground. It's you, she breathed. It's really you. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I was auditioning for love. I didn't feel like I was testing someone. I felt like a daughter. I stepped forward, slowly, and this time when I reached for her, she didn't pull away. Her arms wrapped around me like she was afraid the world might snatch me back. She was thinner than I expected. Her shoulders were smaller, but her heartbeat against my chest was fast, familiar. I buried my face into her shoulder and inhaled. It wasn't a cinematic moment. There was no music swelling. Just the raw sound of two people who had run out of time and finally collided again. She whispered into my hair through broken sobs. My little superhero. That nickname, that exact tone, it split something open inside me. I hadn't heard those words in almost 3 decades. And suddenly I was 6 again, sitting on the mall bench, swinging my legs, waiting. But this time, she had come back. After a long time, we pulled apart. Her hands were still trembling. She reached into the old canvas bag at her feet, carefully, reverently, and she pulled out a photograph. The edges were worn soft. The crease down the middle was permanent. She handed it to me with both hands. In the photo, a young man held a little girl on his shoulders. My father, younger than I ever remembered him. Standing beside him was a woman with long, dark hair and tired but gentle eyes. Her hand rested lightly on the little girl's shoulder. The little girl was wearing a red plaid shirt, curly hair across her forehead, and in her tiny fist, a red superhero toy, not the one from the mall, an older one, smaller, silver paint flaking from the eyes, the exact toy sitting in her bag right now. That was the first one your father ever bought you, she said softly, before he passed. I traced the edges of the photo. My throat felt tight. I thought you left me, I finally whispered. The words weren't angry. They were exhausted. Her face crumpled. When I came back to the bench, you were gone, she said. I thought you followed me. I thought maybe you went to the restroom. I searched every store, every bathroom. I screamed your name until my voice disappeared. Her hands tightened around the bag strap. I ran to the train station. One had just left. Security said they hadn't seen a child like you. The police told me to wait. Her jaw trembled. I didn't have a car. I didn't have money for lawyers. Your father was gone. I slept outside that mall for 4 nights. I thought if someone found you, they'd bring you back there. I felt my chest tighten painfully. I got pushed away, she continued. They said I was disturbing customers. So I walked to the next station. And the next. I stopped at every place with a speaker system, hoping to hear someone call your name. She looked at me with eyes full of years. I never stopped looking, Kayla. I just didn't know where you were. The silence between us felt different now. Not empty, heavy, full of all the time we lost. I saw your film, she said after a moment. I didn't know it was you at first, but when you wrote that line about the superhero, I knew. She lowered her gaze. I came to this building months ago. I stood across the street. I saw people walking in wearing expensive clothes. I saw your name on the door. Her fingers twisted together. I thought, what if she doesn't want someone like me in her life? The shame in her voice hit me harder than anything else she'd said. Someone like me. Poor, worn down, afraid. I realized something then. She hadn't stayed away because she didn't care. She stayed away because she thought I had outgrown her. And for the first time, I understood how poverty can steal more than money. It can steal confidence. It can steal your right to knock on a door. I reached for her hand. You don't have to stand across the street anymore, I said quietly. Her eyes filled again. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the lost child. I felt like the one who had been found. But what I didn't know yet was that finding her would mean learning how to lose her all over again. I brought my mother home that night. Not to a guest room, not to a hotel. Home. The elevator ride up to my apartment was quiet. She stood slightly behind me, as if unsure she was allowed to take up the same space. When the doors opened to the ocean view and polished floors, she paused at the threshold. "This is yours?" she asked softly. "It's ours," I said before I could stop myself. She stepped inside carefully, like the marble might reject her. That first week, she moved like a visitor. She wouldn't open the refrigerator without asking. She folded her coat neatly and placed it on the edge of a chair instead of hanging it up, as if she wasn't staying long enough to deserve the closet. She tried to sleep on the couch the first night. "I don't want to disturb you," she said. "You're not disturbing me," I told her. I rearranged my office into a bedroom for her. I moved the desk against the wall. I brought in a softer mattress. I bought peppermint shampoo because I remembered faintly, or maybe imagined, that she once used it. Every small adjustment was my quiet way of saying, "You belong here." She cooked once during the second week. A simple soup. She kept apologizing for not having better ingredients. I watched her hands while she chopped vegetables. Slow, deliberate, slightly stiff. Those hands had searched train stations for years. Those hands had slept on cold concrete. And now they trembled, while slicing carrots in a penthouse kitchen overlooking the Pacific Ocean. One breezy afternoon, we sat on the balcony eating lunch. The ocean was calm. Too calm. I hadn't planned to ask. But the question had been living in my chest for decades. "After I got lost," I said quietly, staring at my plate, "how long did you look for me?" She didn't answer right away. She set her fork down. "When I realized you weren't on that bench," she began, her voice steady but thin, "I thought I would die on the spot." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "I ran everywhere. Every store. Every restroom. I grabbed security guards. I described your curls, your red shirt, the way you held your toy with your left hand." She swallowed. I ran to the train station. They said a train had just left. I begged them to stop the next one. They couldn't. She looked out at the ocean like she was seeing a different place entirely. "I didn't leave that mall for days. I thought maybe you'd come back to the bench. I slept on the steps. I held your photo." Her voice softened even more. By the 5th day, security told me to leave. I walked from station to station. I listened to every announcement. I worked small jobs just to afford bus tickets. She paused. "I thought I found you 3 times. My heart tightened. Once in Utah, once in Missouri, once near a bus stop across from this very building. I looked at her sharply. "You were there?" She nodded faintly. "I saw your name on a poster. I wasn't sure. I was afraid. I thought maybe I had imagined you for too long." There was no bitterness in her voice, just exhaustion. For a while, we didn't speak. The ocean wind filled the silence. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to believe something I had resisted. She hadn't abandoned me. She had lost me. And losing is different. Time passed quietly after that. We built routines. Morning tea. Afternoon walks. She'd ask about my scripts. I'd pretend to complain about deadlines so she wouldn't feel the weight of how much had changed. The apartment, once silent and museum-like, started sounding lived in. A chair scraping. The kettle whistling. Her soft voice calling my name from the kitchen. And then, I began noticing small things. She forgot to turn the stove on while cooking. She asked where the salt was while holding it. One evening, I found her standing in front of the open fridge. Just staring. "Mom?" I asked gently. She blinked. "Oh, I was looking for something." "What?" She smiled faintly. "I don't remember." At first, I told myself it was age. She was over 60. She had lived through stress that would have broken most people. But the moments started repeating. She'd forget if she had showered. She'd repeat the same story twice in 1 hour. One morning, she walked toward the door, holding the old superhero toy. "Where are you going?" I asked carefully. "To find Kayla," she said. "I think she's waiting for me." The words froze the air in my lungs. "I'm right here," I whispered. She looked at me, confused, not recognizing, just for a few seconds. But seconds can feel like falling off a cliff. I took her to a doctor. Tests. Soft voices. Carefully chosen words. "Early stage Alzheimer's," he said gently. I didn't need him to explain what that meant. No one spends 20 years gripping a single memory without sacrificing something in return. On the drive home, she looked out the window quietly. "Is it bad?" she asked. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel. "It just means I get to take care of you now." She nodded, as if that felt fair. From that day on, I adjusted everything. I labeled drawers with words and pictures. I put sticky notes near the stove. I filled a daily calendar with simple tasks. I placed a framed drawing by her bed, a little girl in a superhero cape holding her mother's hand. I slipped my phone number into her wallet. I never told her why. Some days were good. Very good. She'd remember everything. We'd laugh about how I hated bananas and cereal. She'd call me her little superhero. Other days, she'd ask where Kayla was while I was sitting right beside her. Each time I answered gently, "I'm right here." Each time, she looked at me like she was seeing me through fog. And sometimes, the fog lifted. One morning, I was changing the water in a vase when she appeared in the doorway holding my blanket. "Where's Kayla?" she asked. I walked over slowly. "I'm right here, Mom." She studied my face, really studied it. Then her expression softened. She reached up and touched my cheek. "My little superhero," she whispered. In that moment, I didn't care how many times she forgot, because she remembered, and that was enough. She stayed with me almost 2 more years, and then, on a quiet early autumn morning, she slipped away in her sleep. No dramatic goodbye, no final speech, just stillness. The room smelled faintly of herbal tea. The sun was warm against the curtains. She lay on her side, arms wrapped around a thin blanket, at peace, as if she had finally stopped walking. I buried her beside my father in Oregon. On her gravestone, I carved one line: Sarah Peterson, the woman who kept walking just to find her way home. After the funeral, I returned to Santa Monica. The penthouse felt bigger than ever, quieter. But something inside me wasn't hollow anymore, because I had been found, and I had forgiven. A few weeks later, I rented a small theater for one private screening. Just one night. I played my film again, but I changed the ending. No more rain. No more lonely girl in the field. Instead, morning light, wooden steps, a worn-out superhero toy. A mother in the kitchen making tea. She steps outside, places a hand on her daughter's shoulder. They sit, say nothing, because nothing needs to be explained anymore. And on the final frame, I wrote, "After everything, this wasn't the ending. Just an old dream finally come true." Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. If you were me, after the abandonment, after being returned, after the imposters and the doubt, would you have opened the door? Would you have embraced the woman who spent her whole life searching? Do you believe some kinds of love don't have to begin at the right time to still end whole? Because I used to think love was a contract. Now I know. Sometimes it's a search, and sometimes it's a return.